Perfect. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our session. As mentioned by Mike, my name is Aimee Fanton, and I'm the media and digital lead for Diageo Northern Europe. And I'm here
Thanks.
with Mark.
Thanks, Amy. I'm Mark Goldeman. I'm the founder and CEO at Adelaide Metrics. Adelaide is the first platform that helps advertisers understand the quality of the media they're buying using attention metrics. We've created a metric called AU that we're going to explain today and explain about all the great results that it drove for Diageo. But first, everybody I think who's here in this stage understands why attention metrics are important. But from the media side of things, I think the problem that advertisers are facing today is that there's continued fragmentation, and the metrics that they're using haven't kept up with that fragmentation. There's dozens of placements on a single website when advertisers used to have dozens of placements across all of their media. So at Adelaide, we created a metric called AU. And AU is a 0 to 100 score that measures media quality using attention metrics. It works on 95% of an advertiser's spend today. Everything from the walled gardens through digital audio, CTV, linear, digital out of home, most recently cinema. So it's this omni-channel metric that's really, really easy to understand. Now, you've heard a lot from attention metrics vendors and different applications of attention metrics today. I want to set a little bit of a frame and talk about the evolution of attention metrics. When we started, the first wave of attention metrics was really just using viewability, right? So it's like, how can we count how long is an ad on screen for and use that as a proxy for attention metrics. The second wave of attention metrics was about predicting how long someone looks at an ad, so attention seconds or attention time. We previously to launching Adelaide worked a lot with this second wave of attention metrics. One of the biggest shortcomings is that the amount of time that somebody spends looking at an ad is largely driven by the creative and the audience and not the media. And so at Adelaide, when we wanted to build a metric that was about media quality, we took a step back and said, if it's media's job to create an opportunity for attention that creative capitalizes on, let's measure media quality using the probability of attention. And so that's what AU does. AU measures the probability of attention by any person to any creative in a placement. But the most important thing about attention metrics, and you've heard a lot about this today, is that it drives outcomes. And at Adelaide, we're dogmatic about this. Pretty much every client that we work with, we put them through an A/B test, and we use that A/B test to prove that when they use AU, they're able to drive better outcomes than when they use viewability or other attention metrics or whatever their sort of standard operating procedure for measuring media quality is. Now, this is a test setup that's familiar to everybody here probably, just a simple A/B test or an RCT test, or if you're not comfortable using that, you can do a correlation analysis. But in the end, you really need to focus on connecting attention metrics to outcomes. Otherwise, attention is the ultimate vanity metric. So if you want to scan this QR code here, you can see some of the results that we're typically finding. And so last year, we covered 45 case studies across 18 verticals, people seeing anywhere from 30 to 40% increase in performance while driving down CPMs. I think that's the most important thing. You're getting more efficiency and more performance. Now I'm going to pass it over to Aimee to talk a little bit about why Diageo turned to attention metrics.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. So this was a really exciting case study that we're going to talk about today. Diageo, as a global leader in premium spirits, we've got over sort of 200 drinks options being sold in over 180 countries. So our portfolio is incredibly vast. But today we're going to talk about Germany specifically and a test that we ran with Adelaide within our Amazon DSP setup. So because the German landscape is so competitive, we have lots of competitors on there, everyone is super present, we need to make sure that our media is being displayed in the right, premium quality spaces to the right people at the right time, and then ultimately lead that into a conversion or a sale. So that's why we were really excited to partner up with Adelaide and Mark's team, shout out to Ed and everyone, to work on an audit on our inventory within the Amazon DSP setup. So that's excluding search, just to be specific about that. we wanted to really assess what kind of inventory were we buying, was it actually producing an outcome, and also to look at some of the points that we can see here. How can we measure our retailer quality? Because retail media is a bit of a dark space in that regard. There's not always a measurement option. Does a higher AU or attention score correlate to incremental sales or a positive ROAS? And can we use attention metrics to identify opportunities for future campaign optimization? So these were some of the questions that we were hoping to answer. We conducted this audit during what we call in Diageo lingo OND, so October, November, December, which is one of our biggest sales periods of the year, as you can imagine. So here we want to talk about the two sort of setups here. So firstly, we did a tagless media quality measurement audit. There are a few ways that you can leverage Adelaide's offering. One is to have the tags set up in advance. We had already gone live with this campaign, but we still wanted to test, so that's why we took the retrospective tagless option. And it was 100% privacy safe, which is great, and we measured the inventory on and off platform and segmented it into our categories. I'll get into the results a little bit later. And then, of course, connecting it to media quality outcomes. What does this mean for our current campaign measurement? Where does attention fit in with CPMs and things like that? And how can we make this really actionable in the future? So I'm going to stand over here so you can see this slide. But essentially, if we start to look at some of the learnings that we got, and we got a lot. So I'm only going to bring to you a few of the top ones today. If you look at the table, what we can see here is that we had a higher conversion rate with the inventory placements that had a medium to high or high AU score. So those inventory types were 4.3 times more converting than low and medium to low. So if you look at our full inventory, about a third was bought in low and medium to low, and 2/3 in medium to high and high. And that's because PhD, our global agency, of course, buys across various metrics. But in this retrospective audit, we were happy to see that 2/3 of the purchases were really good on attention. There's obviously an optimization we could look at for this lower section, and we'll get stuck into that in a bit. But that's a really positive first learning. The second thing that we looked at, and I mentioned earlier, categories. In the liquor business, we look at our categories, gin, rum, tequila, and they can be very nuanced, especially in certain markets. You could really say that in certain markets, tequila is up and coming versus gin versus, aperitif. And what was interesting here is that the AU was much higher on all categories. We didn't see any vast differences, and that's really good, because when you're seeing massive differences in categories, things can become a little bit complicated. Naturally, whiskey, less dramatic, something to dig in a little bit deeper on for future campaigns, but it was really positive to see that high conversion rate continue on those inventory pieces with a high AU scores across category. So the next thing that we looked at, which was super interesting, was the cost per AU, and with those changes, do we see a change in ROAS? So when you look at a traditional campaign, of course, CPMs, for example, when you have a super high CPM, you assume super high quality, very premium, and low, the opposite, potentially low, cheap inventory. What was very interesting here is that despite the cost per AU being quite low, the ROAS was super high. So what that means is there's almost like a negative correlation, if you will, that we can buy very well-priced inventory, so cheaper inventory, that has a really good ROAS still. And what that means is we're not going to blow up our CPM prices in our campaigns, which is a good thing. So that was a really interesting learning. When we look at where we invested our money, and if you remember that very first 4-bar chart on the low, medium, low, high, and high AU, we had the Adelaide team put together a bit of a scenario for us, like hypothetically, if we were to shift our investment from low AU inventory to high AU inventory, what would that look like from a return perspective? And what we saw here is that if we shifted 25% of our low AU inventory investment into high, we would get a 12% increase return in sales. Now that translates to a 6-figure number, which is great for us. So I think that was super interesting and something that we'll take into our future campaigns. When we work with our agencies, how do we want to look at where is it most effective to spend our money and get the best returns? And then finally, we also looked at creative and the impact that different formats have on the AU score. And what was quite interesting here, and I think this is somewhat logical as well, if you look at Amazon and you know the custom rec format, it's quite dynamic and it populates based on your search history and it's quite customizable. So you may not see the same custom rec every time you go on. So what you can see by the charts is that custom rec had a much higher AU score than that of a static image. I think that's a bit logical. Something that's a bit more dynamic can hit those attention metrics, but it's always really good to validate those points of data so that we can take these learnings to the creative agencies and say, yes, static has a role, it forms part of the campaign, but we should really consider these dynamic placements to increase that AU score as well. And as we've seen on the previous slides, there's some really nice returns for doing that. And these are just some of our top learnings. I'm going to hand back over to Mark for now.
Thanks, Aimee.
Thank you.
All right, so Aimee talked about a couple of things that are super important. The first is it's a privacy-friendly solution. So cookies are going away, everybody knows that. But the second was, this is the first time that we've run a tagless campaign at scale. And tags are a serious pain in the butt when you're launching a lot of campaigns. But first, let's talk about privacy for a second. The privacy ship has sailed, right? There's regulation, there's a consumer movement. I think our industry needs to move beyond trying to find another way to track consumers and invade their privacy, and just think about how can we measure media quality instead of trying to connect every single exposure to an outcome. So very exciting to see this campaign being completely privacy friendly, but also it was tagless. And this is the first time that we've ever done this. We took 4 years of data and we started to learn about what is the actual quality of the placement rather than trying to measure the quality of impressions. Advertising is a really weird industry. When I got into this industry, I didn't understand, why are we trying to taste every single bottle of wine in order to understand what the rating on a bottle should be, right? So what we're trying to do at Adelaide is move beyond the measuring of every single impression and come up with a shared understanding of placement quality that we can have before the campaign ever runs. So it's really nice because now Diageo knows what the quality of the media they need is in advance. They can go to publishers and say, hey, this is the level of quality that we need. And a publisher can know in advance what the quality of the media they have is, because we're not thinking about measuring every single impression. We're talking about rating the quality of placements. I think this is where the future of attention metrics is going to go, and it's super exciting to work together on this. I'm going to pass it back to Aimee to talk a little bit about what's up next.
Thanks, Mark. So as Mark said, we had a really, really successful campaign, and we thoroughly enjoyed working with the team. Not only has it been quite a seamless integration, which is honestly essential for test and learn pilots as well, but we see really a lot of value in attention as a metric. So I think some of the things that we're looking at doing here, as you can see on the slide, is a larger scale tests and with tags implemented from upfront. So I can say, as a point of progress, we've actually just launched that next stage with Johnny Walker in Germany. So hopefully we can be back next year to present even more positive results. And I think the other side of it as well is we were very lower funnel focused with our Amazon DSP. We'd really like to look at the impact on upper funnel and brand building, because there's quite a saturated market when it comes to that upper funnel brand building piece as well. And I think that's where attention can really drive some disturbance for us within the competitor landscape. And then on top of that, of course, is just expanding into other markets. We've started with Germany, but within Northern Europe, we've got 15 markets, and we'd really like to bring that across. And I think as a final point, and this is something that we are doing a lot of work on internally and in collaboration with our media agency, is where does attention sit in your measurement framework? It's very important, but it can't be at the compromise of any other metrics as well. So how do you weight that priority, and how does it all fit together? And then how can you use those learnings for creative agencies, for our media buys and things like that. So we're really excited for the future prospects, and attention really is important to our future campaigns. So yeah, I think that's it for now.
Thanks, Aimee.
Great.
Thank you very much for that. It's a fascinating talk, and we've just got a couple of minutes just for questions and things like that. So just a couple of things to ask you. Firstly, a lot of the themes of this morning have been about creative, and do you have any? Did you have a chance? You talked about using the rec, the responsive creative stuff. But any other hints and tips about on the creative side about optimizing attention and outcomes on that side?
Do you want to?
Why don't you take it? Go ahead.
Okay, so I think from our side, the first thing is that custom rec format proved to be super positive from an AU score perspective. So the more dynamic really does make sense. However, it's very interesting to understand all the factors that go into that attention metric, and we still have to be compliant. For example, I saw Creative X up here earlier. We also use Creative X, so it has to fit in with the current guidelines. So I think it's about nailing in the media side first, understanding all those correlations and metrics, and then pulling those learnings through to the creative agencies. So for us right now, it's more about integration, getting them involved in this conversation and onboarding them into this process and understanding so that they can also see what kind of metrics their creative produces, which I think is quite interesting because it can be quite siloed sometimes. So that's at least from a brand side. But Mark, anything to add?
So I think it's really interesting to use attention metrics to look at creative, but you don't want to optimize towards the creative that captures the most attention, which is just people's natural instinct when they get a metric like that. I want the creative that's going to capture 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. The reality is that there's a natural tension between how heavily branded a creative is and how much attention it captures. Ads with no branding at all will capture a ton of attention, and that typically won't do a lot of work for the brand. So there's a balance to strike, and I think what you really want to do is work with creative that builds a crescendo of attention, and then you can insert your distinctive assets in your branded elements.
And then a second idea, and again, you may not want to give this away, but there are some ads that have low AU and some have high. Are there any hints and tips you can give the audience about what tends to have a low and what tends to have a high?
I don't think I can't talk to Diageo's results.
Okay, so I think in this particular campaign, what was very interesting was the inventory type. So for example, it could actually be the same creative across different inventory formats. So when it boils down to AU score, it doesn't necessarily mean absolutely different creatives every single time, but it's within that creative, which inventory format or type perform the best. It could be as simple as aspect ratio. It could be as simple as dynamic versus static, as we saw in that last slide. So,
and which way would you fall on that one? Just for the audience there, so they can take some. Is it worth buying dynamic stuff versus static stuff?
Everything plays a role. Yeah, everything plays a role, I think, but dynamic, especially with that custom rec in this particular instance, very much outperformed. So it's not that you shouldn't make statics, but where do they fit within your campaign? Are they just for retargeting? Are they just for a first touch? Where do they fit? We see those video placements and dynamic can excel a little bit more.
Very good. So well, guys, I'm sure Mark and Aimee will be around to answer any other questions about what goes into the AU and how the AU can help your business. So please, a round of applause to the guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.